Danny pedaled his bicycle through the deserted campus streets. The rain had just stopped, leaving behind the faint scent of damp earth mixed with the cold asphalt. The streetlights flickered weakly, casting trembling shadows on the sidewalk. 9:45 p.m. His extra class started at 10 p.m., an unusual time. However, this schedule was assigned directly by the academic office since the daytime classes were already full. As Danny reached the Faculty of History, an uneasy feeling crept over him. The building was older than the others on campus. Its brick walls had blackened in several spots. Large windows with iron grills stood like dark eyes watching him. Climbing the stairs to the fourth floor, his footsteps echoed. The corridor was darker than he had expected, lit only by a few dim, flickering neon lights. At the end of the hall, he saw an old wooden door with black iron lettering above it. Room 407. The door was slightly ajar. Danny peeked inside. The room was full of students, already seated in neat rows, silent, facing forward. Without thinking, Danny stepped in. Something about the atmosphere felt off. Every student in the room sat unnaturally stiff, back straight. No whispers, no one on their phones, not even the slightest movement. Danny felt uneasy. He took an empty seat in the back row. As he sat, he noticed something even stranger. All the students were dressed entirely in black. Before Danny could process this, a tall man emerged from the shadows at the front of the class. The professor wore a tattered black coat, his face pale, with deep dark circles under his eyes as if he hadn't slept in days. He looked directly at Danny and gave a faint smile. "Welcome, Danny. You finally joined us." Danny's heart pounded. How did the professor know his name? He had never ever met this man before. The professor turned and began writing on the board with a brittle white chalk. Course, the hidden history of this campus. The professor slowly walked to the center of the room, letting the eerie silence settle. The history I will teach tonight is not in academic books. This is the history that was erased, the history that was never meant to be remembered. The room remained silent. No one took notes, no one asked questions. The professor exhaled deeply before continuing. This campus was built on something much older. Before the university, before the students, before these grand buildings, this land belonged to those who were lost. Danny frowned. In 1897, before this university existed, this place was home to an orphanage called Kahayabunda Orphanage. But it was unlike other orphanages. The children there were never adopted. No family records, no visitors. They were born there, lived there, and died there. The professor paced the room. Many believe this orphanage was actually a place of experiments. These children weren't ordinary orphans. They were children born from unknown mothers, mothers who mysteriously appeared in the institution's records and then vanished. A chill ran down Danny's spine. Then, on February 14, 1957, the orphanage burned down. The fire erupted suddenly, consuming the entire building in less than an hour. No one survived. The professor paused, scanning the students' faces. But when the rescue team arrived, they found no bodies inside. Danny swallowed hard. No corpses, no bones, no human ashes. The children disappeared. The locals here know better. They say the children never left. The professor locked eyes with each student before speaking again. That tragedy was not the only event on this land. Even after this campus was built, they still demanded something. And from that moment on, students started disappearing. Danny listened intently. 1982, Brian Johnson, a third-year history student. One night, he attended an extra class in room 407. He never returned. His friends swore they saw him enter this room, but the next morning, when the room was checked, there was no one inside. No trace that Brian had ever existed. 1990, Clara Brooke, a brilliant student always present in class until one day, she attended an extra class. After that, her name vanished from all student records. No document showed she had ever enrolled, as if she had never existed. However, some professors claimed they still saw her sitting in a library corner, reading the same book over and over. But when they approached, she disappeared. Danny held his breath. 2007, Johan Darmawan, a final year student found in one of the classrooms, decomposing. But the strangest part, he had attended class just 2 days before. Yet his body was found in a state as if it had been dead for months. The professor smirked. And all of this happened in this very room. The room seemed to darken. The professor walked back to the board and wrote with what little remained of the chalk. "Those who sit in this class will remain here, forever." A biting cold filled the air. Around him, the other students slowly turned to face him. The room darkened further. Suddenly, someone in the front row turned their head toward him. The sound of cracking bones echoed through the space. Danny wanted to scream, but the sound caught in his throat as he saw the student's face. Their skin was a pale, sickly gray, their eyes black voids, bottomless and empty. Danny tried to stand, but his body felt impossibly heavy. His fingers went numb. He looked down and realized something terrifying. His shadow was starting to fade. The janitor, Mr. Salmon, walked slowly through the dark hallway of the 4th floor of the Faculty of History building. The night air felt colder than usual. The dim lights flickered softly, casting long shadows along the walls that seemed to move on their own. He stopped in front of room 407. The wooden door was closed, but the small window at the top provided a view inside. And what he saw made his blood run cold. The room was full. Dozens of students sat silently, neatly arranged in their seats, their faces blank, their eyes staring straight ahead. No one spoke, no one took notes, no one moved. At the front of the class, a man in a worn black coat stood with his back to his students. He was writing something on the chalkboard with a piece of nearly spent white chalk. But the light in the room was strange. It wasn't the cold white glow of typical neon lights, but a dim, aged yellow light, like the glow of an old oil lamp. Salman swallowed hard. He didn't recall any class being scheduled for tonight. This faculty building was usually empty after 8 p.m. Then his eyes caught something in the back row. A student slowly turned toward the window. His neck bones cracked softly. His face looked normal, but his eyes, those eyes were filled with fear. Then his lips began to move, as if trying to speak, but no sound came out. Yet Salman could clearly read his lips. "Help me." Salman's heart pounded wildly. He took a step back, his hands trembling as he reached for the doorknob. Locked. He tried knocking, no response. He knocked again, harder this time. Knock, knock, knock. Suddenly, every student in the room turned toward him in unison. Their movements were too synchronized, too smooth, too unnatural. Salman held his breath. Then, the man at the front of the class, the professor in the tattered black coat, slowly turned around. He stared at Salman through the window with hollow black eyes. And then his smile widened. The hallway lights flickered rapidly, and before Salman could react, all the lights went out. The next morning, in the academic office, a professor opened the attendance sheet for the night class. He scanned the names casually until his eyes caught something odd. At the very bottom of the list, there was a new name, written faintly, as if by a trembling hand. "Danny." The professor frowned. He opened the academic system on his laptop and typed in the name. No student named Danny was registered at the university. He turned to the administrative staff sitting next to him. "The extra class last night? Who was the professor?" The staff looked at him in confusion. "Extra class? There was no night class yesterday. All additional classes ended at 8 p.m. The professor felt uneasy. "But the attendance sheet is right here. A new name appeared last night." The staff shook their head. There has never been a scheduled class on the 4th floor after 8 o'clock. The professor flipped through the attendance sheets. His hands suddenly trembled. On the last page, there was something that shouldn't be there, roughly scratched writing, the letters shaky and uneven. "I am still here. Do not take this class. Do not enter room 407. The professor stared at the words for a long time before sensing something even more unsettling. The academic office felt colder. Outside the window, he caught his own reflection in the glass. His own face, but with a smile he did not make. A few weeks later, a new student walked down the 4th floor corridor. His name was Adrian. He had just transferred from out of town and was still struggling to adjust to his class schedule. Since the daytime classes were full, he had to take an extra class that night. As he passed the bulletin board, he saw a neatly posted class schedule. The writing seemed normal, except for one thing. The paper looked old, as if it had been there for years, and the writing on it seemed freshly added with ink that wasn't completely dry. Course, The Hidden History of the Campus. Time, 10 p.m. Adrian read the notice for a moment, then smiled. I need to take this class. That night, he made his way to the fourth floor. The hallway was dark, silent. Then, without him touching it, the door to room 407 slowly creaked open, inviting him in. Adrian swallowed hard and stepped inside. The door closed softly behind him. Inside the classroom, the students were already seated neatly in their chairs, all of them dressed in black, all of them silent. At the front of the class, a professor in a tattered black coat stood with his back to them, writing something on the chalkboard with white chalk. Adrian took a seat in the back row. He glanced around. Beside him, a student sat motionless, head bowed. But something felt off. The student wasn't moving at all. Slowly, Adrian turned to look at him. The student remained still, head lowered. Adrian thought about greeting him, until suddenly the student turned toward him with an unnaturally stiff and slow movement. His neck bones cracked softly, and that face, a blank, pale face, eyes black, deep, bottomless. Then his lips moved. "You shouldn't have come here." Adrian froze. At the front of the class, the professor finished writing. He turned to Adrian and smiled widely, saying, "Welcome, Adrian. You finally joined us." The classroom lights flickered rapidly, then went dark, and the class began again.